Okay, I'm trying something new here. Um, since we didn't get to meet Tuesday, I created a presentation to go over our writing. Um, so we are headed into our second essay. And remember, this program just builds step by step, starting at the foundation and just putting a layer on each time so that it's an easy way to learn to write. Essay 2 goes from the basic rudimentary essay and those tools of invention, arrangement, and elocution in order to write a proper persuasive essay. This class also, this form of writing, way of writing that goes way back from the ancients, it not only benefits you in your writing, but also in your thinking. And you can apply it to any aspect of life, um, and how to make a decision or how to argue for or against a particular decision. So, this will have benefits for you far beyond the writing process. Let's look at where we've been in terms of invention. Remember that the first day of class, we came up with the three common groups of what makes writing difficult. And you gave all your reasons, things that you struggled with in writing, and we were able to put them into three categories. And one was knowing what in the world we're going to write about in the first place, inventing what to write. Secondly, then, is once we have that, we struggle with how to arrange it. And lastly, how to present it, how to speak it or write it in an eloquent way that gets our point across. So we have a 3-cycle system in our writing program. We spend a week focusing on invention, then in arranging that material, and then in presenting that material. So we are on the second essay. We are on the first part of that cycle of invention. Hoping this presentation is going to help you with invention and the invention strategies. Last week we looked at really focusing on our Annie chart, and we looked at affirming a weather statement or negating a weather statement, and we used the telltale heart. This week we're really going to look at that I column, which is the interesting column. And we're going to learn how to invent ideas, invent things to write about that are interesting within our topic or subject or whatever you want to call it. Zooming out just a little bit, invention strategies consist of 2 main steps. Planning your writing process is the first one, and that's where the Annie chart comes in. And then exploring also the reason why you're writing, looking at your rhetorical situation. Remember that when you're going to write something, you need to ask some basic questions, which are down here under Explore Your Situation, your rhetorical situation. First, what is the purpose of this piece of writing or speech? Who is the audience? What is the genre? Is it an academic setting? Is it a professional setting? Or is it a personal setting? Is there a particular situation? And you can use these steps as well in defining what your solution is going to be. And also, what type of background information, what type of research do you need to conduct? Looking at invention strategies, there are 4 main things that you can do, and I want you to really take some notes on this. First, as with anything, you need to ask questions, and critical questions in terms of our writing for our particular scenario. You really need to ask some critical questions about this piece of literature. But again, it can go into any area. And that's where the 5 common topics come into play. So, first and foremost, you start asking questions. Once you get those questions kind of fleshed out in your mind, then you're going to start mapping and clustering, organizing those questions. Um, and this is where our Annie chart comes in. And our 5 common topic areas will go under the I part, or interesting. So you're going to pull that Annie chart out from last week and finish filling it in this week. After you've done that, it's always good to just take a few minutes and free write and brainstorm. And we'll talk about that more as this presentation goes on. Lastly, and always, one of the things that successful people do and great thinkers do is they keep a commonplace journal. And we gave you one of those on parent orientation, student orientation night. And I've asked you to do some writing in it. This is really what you want to focus on across all the subjects, even in other areas of your life. This is where you write your personal explorations or reflections on these great ideas, as well as responding to quotes from various sources. All right, so let's go to asking those critical questions, that first part of invention. And that's where the 5 common topics come into play. Remember, in your Annie chart, one of the things you do first is you create a weather statement, and then you start kind of looking at ideas that would affirm that statement or would negate that statement, the counter argument, right? Now you're looking at what's interesting, okay? So the I. What's interesting about this? And that's where these 5 common topics come into play. You have the topic of comparison, and I'm going to help define these today. The topic of definition, the topic of circumstance, the topic of relation, and then the topic of testimony. Let's look first at the topic of comparison. A lot of times, in order to really write about something or think about something, we need to know its opposite. So we start asking ourselves these questions. What is, fill in the topic, similar to? The way I like to ask it is, how is X similar to Y? And it could be anything in a big story like The Telltale Heart or a novel. And you can narrow it down to a particular X in that story and a particular Y. I'll show you an example of what I'm talking about in just a minute. The next question to ask is, what is this topic different from? I like to ask it this way too. How is X different from Y? So how is it similar, and then how is it different? How is it similar, and how is it different? Once you have that done, then you move into the next common topic, which is of definition. You may simply need a dictionary definition of a particular subject. One of the questions I ask, especially in literature, is who or what is X? What exactly is this X that I'm considering? What group of things does it belong to, or what kind of thing is X, and subcategorizing it even more. And then I love to do examples. Examples really help me to visualize what I'm thinking about. Okay, so we have the 5 common topics. We've covered comparison, we've covered definition, and we're going to do some examples of these two right now. Okay, so let's look at comparison. So one thing I could ask, and how is X similar to Y? I could ask, how is our narrator similar to the old man. Um, we know that they both live in the same place, so they're similar in that respect. What other things can you think of that we know about that the old man and the narrator may be similar? Obviously, they both have access to all parts of the house. Um, I mean, you could go on and on and on. Are they the same gender? Is the narrator a male? Is the old man, of course, man being male? Um, Most people think the narrator is of the male gender because there is a pronoun he in the story. So that would be gender. And so you can go on and really just stop and think about that question and really try to draw some similarities. Here's another example. Now that we've done similar, let's look at how they're different. Age may be a difference. It seems like our narrator is younger than the character, the old man. So you kind of get the idea of how you can really sit and start to, in your eye chart, how you can really start to look at the similarities and differences. And you may want to pick a different X and a different Y that you're more interested in. This is just an example. You don't have to be stuck with this, okay? All right, let's look at an example of using the telltale heart of definition. Maybe I just really started to think about this thing called murder since this is what happened in this story. And so the first thing is I might look at a dictionary definition of the word murder. What is murder? Who defines murder? What do the laws say is a definition of murder? What does the Bible say is the definition of murder? And I could go right back to Cain and Abel, right? What group of things does this murder belong to? What kind of thing is this murder? I could start thinking about the different types of murder. It's not a murder of like during war, if there's such a thing, which brings another great question. But it seems to me it's a premeditated or planned murder, not a spontaneous or emotional burst out. It's premeditated. It was planned for a long time, wasn't it? And I'm not spelling that right, but premeditated. I'm having a hard time with this pen, so sorry about that. What are some examples of this type of murder, of premeditated murder? And I watch Forensic Files, so I could think of a lot of examples, but maybe we could think of another example from literature. Maybe the murder of Aslan in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Maybe the murder of trying to think of a Disney movie that that the good person was murdered in. I know there's lots of them, but being late, I can't come up with it right now. But you get the idea of how you start thinking of your own examples of this, what you've defined as this murder. And again, it doesn't have to be murder. This is just an example. You can do anything you want in relation to the telltale heart. Maybe you could even look at the definition of tale. What is a tale? Okay? All right. I really didn't touch on circumstance in my presentation, so I want to talk about that quickly. Circumstance is kind of interesting. It's just looking at, I'm going to put it up here, the topic or common topic of circumstance, okay? It's really hard to write with a mouse, just saying. Thought it would be easier. Okay. When you're looking at circumstance, the two big questions you ask is what was happening in the same place and time as this issue or situation? So, what was happening in the room? What was happening in the house? What was happening at that time, night after night, and at the same place in the house or in the room as this situation? The other thing you could ask is what was happening at the same time, but in different places from the situation. So, what was the historical period? Do we know? What was happening in the neighborhood? Do we know? What was happening at the police station? Do we know? Obviously, we know that somebody was awake or was awakened by the noise in the room, correct? Okay, so we've had the topic of comparison, the topic of definition, and the topic of circumstance, all of which fit under our interesting part of our chart, our I part. Now let's look at relationship. The two big questions we ask in looking at the relationship is what led to the situation in which a decision needs to be made, and what followed the decision. Now, this could go in all different kinds of directions in the Telltale Heart. We could look specifically at our narrator and his situation and the decision he made in murdering this old man. We could also look at the situation which led to a decision by the old man to entrust this narrator to live with him. Is he a friend? Is he renting? Is he a servant of some kind? Is he a relative? Is he the son? What led to the situation of him living there with the old man? Now, our story leaves us a lot of room for interpretation. So you could put what you kind of thought in based on the tone and the mood of the story. Okay? And then what followed that decision? So, obviously, what followed the decision of the old man allowing the narrator to live there, or what followed the decision that the narrator made in becoming so upset with this man's eye? And that's pretty symbolic, I would think. Maybe that's the situation that I want to address is the eye and how it's described as a vulture eye. Something to do with vultures. What's the nature of a vulture? What do they do with their eye? They're looking for already dead prey, right? They don't kill. They already look at things that are dead. So, what is this saying about our narrator and death in relation to the vulture eye staring at him? And then what followed the decision for him to murder the old man? So, what are the actions that followed? Who else got involved? Who else comes into the scene? We could talk about that. Who comes along? So we all of a sudden we're getting a lot of information. The biggest thing, I'm a visual learner, is you're looking basically in a relationship at the cause. What was the effect of that cause? Was there a purpose to that effect and that cause? And what else is missing that I may not be thinking about or may not have information that I might need to know? Okay? Testimony. We've done comparison, definition, circumstance, and relationship. So the last common topic is, the fifth one is testimony. What do the witnesses say about the character and or his actions, his or her actions? So what witnesses did we have? We had the neighbor who heard a noise. And why on earth would the neighbor be so preempted to immediately call the police? What does it say about the relationship between the narrator and the neighbor? Maybe the neighbor obviously was already suspicious of our character, right? That's something we could look at. What have I heard people say about this story, The Telltale Heart, about the story itself? Maybe I go do some Google research, or about the author and what he typically tried to display and or talk about in his stories, or maybe about the topic of murder itself. What have I heard people say about a murderous situation like this? What are some facts and stats about the story? It's a classic, it's been around a long time. So, what are some facts about this story that I can go find? What are some facts or stats about the author? Um, what are some facts or stats about murder? How common is murder of premeditation? These are all the things I could go get testimony about. Okay? All right, so you see, we're getting an awful lot we could write about in our next paper. Oh, wait, let me go back. I already talked about this, but I'll just touch on it quickly. What do witnesses say? What have I heard people say about insanity? That might be another good one. And what are some facts or statistics about the criminally insane? Is it, what's the gender relationship? What's the incidence of in the United States, assuming this took place in the United States? So I could even go down that road. The common topics, they're not really called common topics anymore, although that's what we're going to call them. A lot of times you'll hear in other classes, you'll hear stasis topics. But if you start looking at how they organize it more scientifically, I guess is what they're trying to do, you can look at the questions under each of their categories and you can see that it really fits naturally into one of the 5 common topics. So, under the modern version of facts, what are the facts? They ask first and foremost, what's the issue? Well, if it's a story, there's always going to be an issue or conflict, or it's not a story, right? Okay, so that kind of brings you straight back to the Annie chart because you're able to really flesh out an issue and a weather statement, right? How did it begin and what are its causes? So that goes back to the situation and the circumstance. What changed to create the issue? We're right there in the topic of circumstance. Who is involved? Again, circumstance. So there's a very nice fit to one of the common topics. And then, of course, definition. Well, that's a common topic itself, so we really don't need to belabor that point, do we? Quality. They'll use the word quality a lot. How serious is the issue? What are the costs of the issue? And you can look at that in terms of definition as well, but you can also look at it very similar to relation. And then they'll go into specifically with historical or political or governmental policies. Who should address this issue? So in our story, we could even look at who is involved in the circumstance, what relation do they have to the situation. So it kind of covers those 2 topics, even testimony, the topic of testimony, because you could look at policies and related to the police officers coming, policies and related to the relationship to in neighborhood watches. You could go on and on and on, but you see that it's really the same thing. Contrastive features would go back to comparison. Variation goes back to comparison and relation. So they've made it a little bit more scientific and complicated, if you ask me. I like sticking with the number 5. Um, excuse me. A lot of times they do this whole section in modern called distribution. How does it distribute out? Again, this goes back really to definition. You're describing it, you are comparing it. So now we're in the topic of comparison. You're associating it. Again, comparison and relation. Analyzing it is really all of the 5 common topics. But how is it made could relate to, in our particular example, how was the situation created? So as you can see, they've just added a whole lot more for us to try to remember. But if we really just stick with the 5 topics and the couple of questions under each one, they'll help us to arrive at all of these questions anyway. Okay, so we've gone through our 5 common topics and we've started to put them in our Annie chart. Another thing to do to really kind of flesh out what you're wanting to focus on and maybe what you're going to write about or think about for a while, having that scole or contemplative time, is a free writing exercise. And I want you guys to do that today. So I want you to get a sheet of paper. Your sentences don't have to be finished. You don't have to revise and edit. This is just free writing. And I want you to look at a topic. Typically, you'll think of your own. I'm going to give you one as an example that I want you to write about so we have something to talk about on Tuesday. I want you to look at the topic and think about it briefly. How does an immoral act of murder affect the narrator or doer and the victim? Now, obviously the victim loses his life, but go deeper than that for me. How does this act of murder possibly affect this man, in his family, his circumstances? I mean, really think about that. So I want you to set your timer for 5 minutes, and I just want you to write. Just start writing, okay? The question, how does an immoral act of murder affect the doer and affect the victim, besides him losing his life? On your marks, get set, go. Make sure to pause this. Okay, now that you've done that, the other thing you could do, let's say you don't have free writing time, is you could just brainstorm. And how do you brainstorm? I know all of you have heard that, but how do you brainstorm to write? One of the things you can do is note these keywords or phrases in your writing prompt, and start listing them in form under the subject. Okay? You could also, if you've done both, you can go to your free writing prompt and start underlining some keywords or phrases that were popping up in your free write. But typically what you'll do, and this is really good to do right before, like when you're doing a time test, is to underline those keywords or phrases to kind of narrow your focus on your subject of what you're writing about. So go back and look at the topic one more time. How does an immoral act of murder affect the doer and the victim? Underline the keywords or phrases in that prompt. Maybe go back and look at your writing, your free write that you did. Set your timer for about 5 minutes and then put your subject at the top, and then underneath, just start listing these key words or phrases. All right, make sure you pause this and after 5 minutes, come back. Okay, finally, when we're really in a pinch or we're really trying to flesh some stuff out, this is really good to do for research. But you can, especially if you're a visual learner, you can map and cluster out these things that you've been thinking about. So you're going to start with a central word, and then as these related concepts pop in your head, you're going to start making branches or arrows or bubbles. You know, some people do this little spider web looking kind of thing. You can do that. I liked this example. They were given a research topic on global warming, and they just started kind of free flowing these branches of ideas. Notice that they first asked themselves, well, what do I know of the causes, or what are the reported causes? And what's the evidence of all that? What solutions have been given? And under causes, they looked at theories and who is saying this. They also then started looking at, well, how does the United States address this? How does Europe address this? Do they even believe in global warming? And if so, are there any policies or procedures that they have implemented? So they started really fleshing out related to a nation, since they took the keyword global and were thinking of the world. They then started looking at the big players. Okay, so you kind of get the idea how they drew lots of pictures. They had some questions. They had some mini factoids, and then they started drawing relationship arrows to those. So it's a really good chart. They gave some examples when they were thinking of it about El Nino. Just all kinds of things that are similar. Basically, if you look at it, they started comparing and contrasting, defining. They basically put the 5 common topics in a visual presentation. All right, so I want you to try your hand at this. Let's look at a central word that I would pull, a main themed word from the story, The Telltale Heart. And I would be thinking along the lines of immorality, and specifically sin. I think this is a big struggle, especially with his conviction at the end, that this really boils down to a sin moment. And what were the causes of that sin? What are causes of sin in general? What does the Bible say about causes of sin? Situations that happen during the event, inside or outside of the situation. What typically happens to a person when they are confronted with a moment of choice between sinning or not? Okay, well, that's going to lead me over here to, well, what is the definition of sin? What is sin exactly? What is right and wrong? And who determines it? So I would start branching all over the place with that, right? Testimony. Who are the experts and what do they have to say? So, particularly to the story, what does my author, as the expert of this story, have to say in any of his commentary? What does the experts in sin have to say? What about experts on premeditated murder and the law? Maybe that's another area, another branch I want to make. So you can just go on and on and on. What are the effects of sin? what were the effects in this particular story? What are the effects um, on mankind? What are the effects on the individual? Are there any things about health and stress and sin? Are there health effects on making unwise or sinful decisions? What's the evidence that sin exists? What's the evidence that this was a wage of conviction of sin? What is the evidence that this was a murderous act that had no just cause? I mean, you could go on and on, but looking at the evidence, even the existence of sin, is there evidence? So, the existence and nature of sin, what's the evidence? So, you get the idea. Bet you're thinking, wow, I got a lot to write about now. Okay, lastly, keeping that commonplace journal is so important. Across more than just school, but all subjects, also all areas of your life. If you're an artist, keep a commonplace journal about particular other artists you've studied, or techniques, or quotes about that other artists have made on becoming a successful artist, etc., etc., etc. So, what I want you to do in this particular situation is to personally reflect in your journal. I want you to find a quote from the story or from the author himself, something you find significant and important, okay? Something you bothered you, a quote that upset you, or maybe one you could relate to, or shocked you, whatever it is. And then I want you to just start reflecting, having, the word is skole, contemplative thought about this, about what you're learning and thinking about, okay? Why is it important to you? Why'd you choose that quote? How does it relate to you? How do you feel about it? Can you think of a time in the past where you've kind of addressed this issue or this situation has come up, and how did you feel about it then, and how do you feel about it now after reading the story? Has it changed? Did the story solidify your feelings? What about the whole notion of this was a allegory for slavery, and the old man was actually a nation that's enslaved in the concept of the institution of slavery? You could go there. How might my connection to this change in the future? What about murder? I mean, most of us, from the time we're very little, we know that it's wrong. But what unusual circumstance would the connection to an absolute murder is wrong change in the future? What if somebody came into your home? Anyway, you kind of get the idea of what a commonplace journal really allows you to do. It really allows you to think about how you're thinking about this and how those quotes and things are impacting your thinking. Lastly and quickly, another thing you can do in your journal is what good authors do, what fictional writers do, is they keep a personal journal, a commonplace journal, and they'll find a particular event or a quote, and they'll start creating a storyboard about that topic. They'll list characters, and then they'll make notes on how there be a situation and how each character is going to deal with that conflict or situation. Then they'll put notes about, okay, well, why are they reacting the way they do? Is there a past experience? Is it a personality issue? Is it a cultural thing they grew up in? So they'll jot little notes down about each character. And then basically they give a synopsis of, a quick, the beginning, the middle, the end of their story. Just very basic. And then they'll ask themselves, how am I going to end the story? How is the story going to end? And then how is it going to reflect or answer the question that I'm really trying to address in a real life situation? Maybe a commentary on civil rights. Maybe it's a commentary on the 20th century. Maybe it's a commentary on the decline of morality in the culture of the United States. So whatever that big real life situation is. And then lastly, what would they do to bring about this change? Maybe in your own personal life, you want to reflect on that. Maybe personally, there's maybe an issue with an area in your life that you feel is you're enslaved to a sinful situation. Maybe you're in the habit of lying, or maybe you are in the habit of being not effective with your time. Maybe you get angry real quick. Maybe you're too sensitive and end up hurting others by accusing them of hurting you. I mean, the list can go on and on and on, and how it relates to this storytelling you're doing around this story you've read. So that's another thing you can do is you run into a situation and you start creating, ooh, I could do a story about that, and here's my characters, and here's their actions, and here's how it's going to end, and how I want it in my own life to be if I've encountered something like this, and what do I have to do to bring about this change in me or in my situation. Okay, so just to recap, giving you a lot of information. This week, Essay 2, we're really focusing on taking those 5 common topics. They're in your student workbook, page 9. And you are going to go through each of those 5 common topic questions and answer them based on a topic you choose within the Telltale Heart. Okay, so we're not changing our story, but maybe you're changing your focus using the Telltale Heart. Remember that this is under the I in the Annie chart. Now, you don't have to go write it in the I section of your Annie chart last week. You can simply fill out page 9 and then attach your free writing and brainstorming. Okay? Feel free also, if you want to dig further and map and cluster this topic of yours, or free write specifically about it, or brainstorm based on the keywords you're putting into your weather statement or your topic. And then I've already assigned you this part in the Commonplace Journal, finding a quote from the story or from the author. Make sure you bring this to class. We're going to share all of this. Of course, anything that's extremely personal that you really don't want to share, you certainly don't have to. I'm not going to do that. But the rest of it, we're going to share and discuss. So the rest of your assignment for this week is just that. Apply this to the I in your Annie chart from Essay 1. If you want, from that topic, if you want to keep that topic. If you want to choose a different topic under the Telltale Heart, you certainly can do that. Just put your topic on the top of page 9, okay? Make sure you attach your free writes, any mind maps, and make sure that you do your commonplace journaling and bring it to class. The end. I will see you guys Tuesday.